Hey guys, Romansliders here, welcoming you to a special episode of Gaming Rewind, looking back at the history of the Sony PlayStation. As Sega was being pushed off into the distance before pulling out of console production, Nintendo found a new challenger in Sony. The multimedia company had decided to enter the video game industry, and the fight between Nintendo and Sony for gaming supremacy dominated the console wars in the mid to late 90s. However, before we can go any further with the PlayStation, we have to go back to the mid-80s and Nintendo's tentative first steps into the video game market. Nintendo had been experimenting with disc-based drives when it released the Famicom Disk System in 1986, a disc add-on for the Japanese NES. Unfortunately, the hardware had a number of issues, from loading problems, numerous disk errors, and the fact that the system's three writable magnetic floppy disks could be easily erased, leading to a lack of durability and any sort of copy protection against piracy. With these issues, Nintendo decided to abandon disc-based drives, concentrating on their cartridge format, with the Famicom Disk System never being released outside of Japan. Eventually, a new disc system was released in the form of the CD-ROM XA, a joint venture between Sony and Philips, and did not have the problems posed by floppy disks. The CD-ROM XA was a variant of the CD-ROM and combined audio, visual and computer data together, allowing all three to be accessed at the same time. It was at this point Nintendo approached Sony to develop a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo that was to be called the SNES CD. At the time of the development of the SNES CD, Sony also planned to create a Super Nintendo compatible Sony branded console that would be able to play both Super Nintendo cartridges, as well as a new CD format that Sony would design. The new CD format would also be used for the SNES CD, granting Sony a large degree of control within the video game market. The CD add-on would later be known as the PlayStation, with a space between Play and Station, and was to be announced at the 1991 Consumer Electronics Show, when Nintendo's then president Hiroshi Yamaguchi, upon reading the original contract between Nintendo and Sony, realized that it gave Sony complete creative control over all titles developed for the SNES CD-ROM format. Yamaguchi called off plans and abandoned the Super Nintendo CD attachment. Instead of announcing a partnership between Sony and Nintendo at the CES, Nintendo now revealed that they were partners with Philips, with a deal that will give Nintendo complete control over titles developed on Philips machines. And the less said about that, the better. After being left in the cold by Nintendo and the collapse of the SNES CD, Sony took what they already had in development and decided to create a new standalone console, entirely CD-based. It was at this time Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Sony over the rights to the PlayStation name. However, by the end of 1992, both companies came to an agreement where the PlayStation would still have a port for SNES games, Nintendo would receive the majority of the profits from the games, and the Super Nintendo would use the Sony-developed audio chip. At the beginning of 1993, Sony went in a different direction, reworking the concept for the PlayStation, taking advantage of the new CD-ROM technology, removing the SNES cartridge port, and changed the name PlayStation, removing the space between the names so that it became the Sony PlayStation. This move effectively ended Nintendo's involvement in the project, and in so doing, Nintendo had unknowingly created their next rival. The Sony PlayStation was released in Japan in December 1994 and North America and Europe the following year in late 1995, with a retail price of $299. The launch titles for the system included Doom, Warhawk, Rayman, The Raiden Project, Air Combat, Ridge Racer, and Wipeout. The PlayStation had a very successful launch lineup with games in almost every genre from racing to first-person shooter. While Nintendo had a core base of younger gamers, Sony targeted a broader, more adult demographic and marketed the PlayStation towards older gamers and newcomers alike, which was reflected in the eclectic mix of game genres. Consumers and critics were stunned by the power of the 32-bit processor, witnessing readily available 3D games with full motion video like Wipeout, and the sheer leap between what the Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive had to offer. Nintendo was slow to catch up, releasing its next console, the Nintendo 64, in 1996, with games sprouting 3D graphics, but still relying on game cartridges. In addition to playing games, the PlayStation also had the ability to play audio CDs with its inbuilt CD player, as well as a memory card manager where saved game data could be stored. The CD format did much to hasten the demise of cartridge-based home consoles, as the PlayStation was the first console to successfully use the CD-ROM format. On the other hand, Nintendo was skeptical of CDs, citing longer loading times, durability issues, and rampant piracy, although the pros far outweigh the cons, as the increasing complexity of video games, from graphics to content, pushed cartridges to their capacity limits, making CDs more attractive to developers. CDs could be mass-produced at a lower cost and afforded designers more flexibility in game creation. The debate between cartridges and CDs cost Nintendo some high-quality titles, most notably Final Fantasy VII, which was initially to be developed for the Nintendo 64, and the resulting defection of Square and Enix. The PlayStation would frequently see new games released for the system, while Nintendo 64 releases were infrequent due to their expense. Sony would later redesign the PlayStation console in 2000 with a more cost-effective slimline design, naming it the PS1, thus keeping it in continuity with the PlayStation 2 and later the PlayStation 3. The final PlayStation game was FIFA Football 2005, released in 2004, with games continuing to sell until Sony ceased production of PlayStation games in 2006. In an industry that was dominated by Nintendo and Sega in the early 90s, Sony Computer Entertainment was the young upstart that took the gaming industry by storm. Nintendo had dominated the market since the mid-80s, with the NES and the Super Nintendo. The Nintendo 64 was expected to continue that dominance. Sony took advantage of the new innovations in digital technology, pushing Nintendo into second place, which was completely unheard of. By the end of the PlayStation's life cycle, it had become the first video game platform to sell over 1 million units. A new king had been crowned, and the success would later pave the way for the PlayStation's successor, the PlayStation 2, and Microsoft's entry into the console wars. Well, that ends this retrospective on the PlayStation. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please comment, like, share and subscribe. Also, be sure to check out BriefGen Games. He's an upcoming channel and does pretty funny game reviews, and could use your support. Go to my Facebook page for regular updates, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, guys.